Okay, let's go ahead and start looking at this page in a browser and see if we can figure out what different parts of the CSS code do as we look at it in the browser and as we figure out what's going on here. So I'm actually opened up Firefox, the developer edition, and it's a browser that we'll use throughout the semester because it has really nice tools for learning Flexbox and for Grid. But for right now, this isn't going to matter all that much on your end if you're looking at this in Chrome, Safari, regular Firefox, whatever version of browsers you have on your computer, Edge, and Internet Explorer should also work fine with this. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my finished.html page and just drop it into the browser itself. And we see that we have some styles going on the page, which is neat. This isn't kind of generic looking. There's a hover effect going on here when we have our menu bar. That's all centered. Let's take a look at this container tag that we saw here before. So we can see, if you recall from the last video, the container tag had a couple of, the container ID had a couple of things that were put on it to give it a width and a margin. So the width of 95% and the margin of 0 auto, remember the margin of 0 is top and bottom, auto is right and left. So what that means is that we have a little bit of margin on the sides of this thing when we're making it bigger and smaller, so the content doesn't go all the way to the edge. And though certainly I wouldn't want to have body text go quite this wide, you get the basic idea about how you might center content here in the browser. If we right-click here, we can actually inspect any element that we want to have on the page. And so if I right-click here and if I inspect this element, what it'll actually tell me is what portions of the element are going on here in the page. You can see here that there's a div with an ID of container, and it's going to tell me exactly what's going on with that portion of the page, how large it is, and where it goes down to. And over here, if I take a look at the layout module here, the container will also tell me what the margin, border, and padding all are. So the margin you can see here, the border, which doesn't have any, padding doesn't have any, and it's going to tell me what the width of this is and what the height of it is, kind of as I touch or I mouse over each of these things. You can see here, if I put my mouse over the margin, for example, then the right side of the page lights up in that little bit of yellow, and it gives me a dotted line telling me where the margin is being applied. We'll dive much deeper into the web inspector later on in the class, but this is just the basic, really quick peek at what it can do for you to tell you where different pieces of the page are and what's going on here. So let's keep on reading down a little bit. So we have navigation here. We'll take a look at what that is. It's a class of nav, and over in the finished HTML side, this class of nav is actually an ID that's applied to a UL. If you recall from the HTML lecture, that's an unordered list. And then my UL has list items in it that have my actual navigation, and then my UL closes down here. So the ID of nav applies here. A few things are going on with nav, and this is a good way to start talking about sort of inheritance in CSS, because applied just to the navigation is padding of 0, which gets rid of the extra padding that gets set on navigation items, and then a list style type of none, so there's no styles in this list. If you recall, these are unordered list items, and so you would normally expect the list items here that are unordered to have a bullet by them when they're viewed in the browser. Here, this command, the list style type none, gets rid of those bullets for you. Pretty cool. Okay, let's look at the list items themselves. Let's take a look back in the web inspector here for a quick second, and we'll inspect some of these items. And it's important to keep in mind that the unordered list is this entire thing. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so you can see a bit more of the web inspector over here. The unordered list is this entire chunk of content that we have here. And then the list items within it are items that are child items of that, and they have individual items that are set inside them. So the UL is the whole thing, and the list items are styled separately. And so this little command here, using the nav ID to identify what we want to do first, and then using the list item within that, means that these style rules that are below here, the margin, the padding, and the border, are only going to apply to list items that are inside of this, this thing that has an ID of nav. So not the other list items on the page, just the ones that are inside of nav here. So that's kind of cool. So you can tell the list items here have gotten rid of margin, we've gotten rid of the padding on them, and we have a border on the bottom of them, as you would assume that there is in the box model of CSS. If we go back and look at this, we have a top, a right, a bottom, and a left side on any set of stuff that we have here. So here, because we've added the border bottom command, we have a border on the bottom of the box that is 1 pixel, solid, and it's the CCC color. It's kind of a light gray color. It's pretty subtle. You might need to look at the actual code example in a browser to see it, but you can kind of see here that there's a light gray on the bottom of each of these items. So moving on, now the code's getting a little bit more complicated. We have navigation link and visited styles. I want to make the link and the visited styles of this navigation the same. We'll talk about the reasons why we might want to do that separately. But the other thing that you'll notice here is that I've got two selectors up here now. So I have the nav selector for links that are inside of nav, and then I have the visited selector for links that are inside of nav as well. And I'm telling the browser to apply the same style to both of these by adding in this comma here before the actual style declaration starts. And this one's kind of a long one, but so we'll take it one step at a time. The first thing that I want to do is to sort of make a little bit clearer, hopefully, the distinction here. So again, this whole UL has an ID of nav, and then within that I have list items. And if I go down, I see that then within these list items, I have actual ahref tags that have the different pages and then the name of whatever I want the link to be. Let's look at that actually over in the HTML, where it might be a little bit larger for you guys to be able to see. Perfect. So UL with an ID of nav, this is my whole ordered list. And then my list items in here start and end on the same line, but inside of those list items, I also have a link. So to really style all this, I need to make sure that I'm styling the link that's associated with the list items that's associated with the nav, which is pretty much exactly what this command is doing for me over in my style sheet. So again, the link and the visited styles for within nav. Again, keep in mind, these link and visited styles are pseudo classes, so they'll apply to any A tag, but it's telling what style to display, or what state, rather, the style should be applied to within this. You don't need to write a nav and a visited, A tag over here. This just exists over in the CSS. Okay, so let's keep going with this one. First thing you're going to see is that there's a display command here in CSS. We talked about a block level and an inline element in HTML, but to review those, a block level element is one that starts and ends a new line in the browser, and an inline element is one that's just inline, just has a single line here. By default, links are inline elements because you don't want to be reading a paragraph and say, that says go visit this link, and then all of a sudden there's a big jarring white gap between the words before that and the words after that, so they're inline elements. If they're left as inline elements, though, the problem with that is that you can only click the actual text of the link to get it to work. If they are block level elements, as you can see when I'm rolling over them here, I can click anywhere here and get this link to work for me. This goes to an unstyled part of the page, don't worry, that's totally normal. So I can click anywhere in here. This is much preferable for people using mobile devices or people who might just not be able to hit that touch target of the little home thing very small. So when you're using links in navigation, we often will use the block level command to make this whole block clickable, essentially. Okay, let's flip back over to the code. Color, you guys know this, you totally own this at this point, it's white. And color, I should mention, applies to the text. When HTML was first invented, it was all about the text of the HTML, of course, so the color will apply to the text there. If I want, and we can see that over here in Firefox again, home stuff, things, and about are all white. And then if we go back over to the code again, we can see that we have a background color here. It's this kind of gnarly hashtag, but it's green, is what you need to know. So color, apply to the text, background color will apply to the background. And then there's three more commands that are new for you guys. Font weight is bold here, so I've told the font to become bold. Text align, I've said center here, and what the text alignment of center means, of course, is that as the browser gets bigger and smaller, the text stays centered within its navigation here, or within its block here. And the text decoration of none, what this does for us is that there is text decoration that's applied to links by default. You've all seen it, and it's the little underline on the link. In this case, in styling the nav in this state, I don't want any text decoration, so I'm just going to say none here, and that gets rid of the text decoration on the bottom. And then finally, the padding here of 4 pixels goes all around the links. And then the font family you've seen before with the font stack up above, easy peasy, Helvetica, Arial, Sans Serif, you know what's going on there. The browser's going to try the first one, then the second, then the third, before it defaults to whatever the browser default is. Okay, one more line, 3 more lines I guess, and then we'll pause here and move to the next video. The link and the visited states, you'll recall, the link state is the basic state that the link is in by default, and then the visited state is what it is after you visited it. And then the hover and the active state. The hover is the state the link is in when it's hovered over, and the active state is what it is when you click on it. Now, an error that a lot of people make when they're new to CSS is they're writing something like this and they think that they need to recapitulate all this stuff here. You don't. All you're doing is you're telling the browser what's going on if the navigation is hovered over or if it's clicked on to be active. And so when that happens, all that's going to happen is that the background color is going to change from this color to this color. So I don't need to rewrite all this other code unless I want any of it to change, which I probably don't. So hover, and then we see our other green background color happening. Okay, let's pause there, and we'll re-pick up again in just a quick second with our caption styles, and we'll start talking about classes.